I am often puzzled at the present, that of all the ways that things could have gone, this is the final dictation of fate, so to speak, at least for the fleeting moment. Of course, things could have gone many such ways, and most of history strikes me as a kind of comedy of errors. For instance, it often surprises me that Christianity has proven as overwhelmingly successful as it is. I can easily imagine a world where this minor sect within first century Judaism passed into the oblivion of history, much like the Alexandrian Therapeutae, the Sadducees of the Temple Cult, or the apocalyptic Essenes. The Jesus movement just as easily could have been another extinct sect of Judaism. At the same time, I could easily imagine the survival of other groups, such as the dualistic Manichaeans, the religious Neoplatonists, the Hermeticists, or even more likely, the followers of Mithras. The cult of Mithras was one of the most popular religions in the first few centuries of the Common Era, and dozens of cultic sites survive even to this day. From the Scottish border to the north, to western Spain, to the great city of Memphis in Egypt, near Mosul in modern-day Iraq, to Roman Dacia or Romania in the east, cultic sites are Mithraeums extended all over the entire Roman world. Despite the popularity of this religion, we know basically nothing about the inner mythology or the religious practices of Mithraism. The reason for our ignorance is that aside from their cultic sites, a handful of inscriptions and some artistic depictions, almost nothing survives. Almost nothing. In this episode, we're going to explore what may be one of the only surviving texts from the cult of Mithras, a liturgical ritual which induces a vision of Mithras as the divine sun and promises nothing short of immortality. I hope you'll join me as we explore this controversial Mithras liturgy. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. While this episode won't be an in-depth discussion of the cult of Mithras itself, that would be its own future episode, let's lay out what little we do in fact know. The Mysteries of Mithras, as they were known at the time, was a Roman new religious movement based around an innovative reimagining of the original Persian justice and sun god Mithra. It's important to note that while the central god here was Persian or Zoroastrian, modern scholars think that the Roman religion had little to do, either ritually or mythologically, with its Persian origin. The religion had 7 grades of initiation and met in underground temples, likely for ritual meals. While the mythological character of the religion remains basically completely mysterious, several motifs regularly appear. These include Mithras being born from a stone, his killing of a bull, often while looking over his left shoulder, a lion-headed figure wrapped in a serpent, a banquet with the sun, along with a host of various astrological imagery. Over 400 sites from the first few centuries of the Common Era have yielded evidence of Mithras worship, and the cult was one of the chief religious competitors with early Christianity, apparently proving quite popular with the Roman army. The cult seems to have admitted only men, although this has been recently questioned, and a ritual meal seems to have been of great importance. Indeed, the underground temples that survive were likely for hosting this meal, with imagery of Mithras at the head of the room acting as a kind of metaphysical host. With the exception of the text we'll discuss in this episode, virtually no other accounts of Mithraic mythology or ritual survive from members of that religion. All that basically survive are polemical texts, many of which come from Christians arguing against Mithraism. Before turning to the Mithras Liturgy itself, it's worth mentioning that a badly preserved papyrus from Egypt seems to be a catechism-like text for the Leo grade of initiation, though this text is so poorly preserved that almost nothing can be gleaned from it, aside from a few brief references to the origin of the world, mentions of food and drink, and the number 7 likely represents the initiatory grades along with their planetary correspondence. The so-called Mithras Liturgy, however, survives in a surprisingly good state of preservation. Now, I say so-called because the text itself never uses the term Mithras Liturgy, and that title was controversially given to the text by the famed scholar Albrecht Dietrich. Indeed, scholarship on this document has proven very divisive. The famed scholar Franz Cumont rejected that the text represented an authentic Mithraic ritual, while both Meyer and Klaus hold that it is. Betz seems to actually hold that it was a Mithraic ritual, though localized under some form of Egyptian syncretism. The general consensus, at least at this point, seems to indicate that the text is an actual Mithraic liturgy. However, there is skepticism that a universal set of Mithraic scriptures or liturgical rites existed for this incredibly widespread religion. Again, with such a paucity of evidence, it's difficult to say anything for sure. That said, I'll refer to the text as the Mithras Liturgy or just the liturgy just the same, keeping in mind all this super fun controversy. The liturgy itself appears in the Great Paris Magical Papyrus, also known as PGM-4. As you may know, the Greek magical papyri are a vast collection of magical texts recovered from late classical Egypt and represent a truly enormous range of magical rituals and spells spanning several languages and cultures. I've done an entire episode on the Greek magical papyri if you want to check out that. Take a look at the card above. From what we can tell, the manuscript dates to around 300 of the Common Era, though the liturgy itself is likely older. The text refers to itself as an apothanatismos, literally an immortalizer, and it is, so far as I know, the only text in the Greek magical papyri which claim to provide immortality. For that reason alone, the text is exceptional. So why is the liturgy linked with the Mithras cult? The major reasons include the invocation of Helios Mithras and the prelude to the liturgy itself, the imagery of the solar deity grasping a bull, but also the depictions of that solar deity revealed in the text are strikingly similar to the depictions of Mithras found throughout the Roman Empire. Further, the 7 initiations and their planetary correspondences seem to structure the cycle of the prayers, which provide for the ascent to the Mithraic solar deity of the liturgy. All in all, while much of the text is mysterious, to say the very least, there are good reasons to think that the liturgy is fundamentally Mithraic, even if Egyptian material is also interpolated into the text as well. The text begins, as I noted earlier, with an invocation to Helios Mithras as part of a mystical ascent by which immortality is achieved by first beholding the entire universe and then Mithras himself as a solar deity. Curiously, the text also refers to a daughter who is apparently responsible for making the ritual ointment necessary for the mystical ascent. Egyptian texts, especially medical and magical texts, often refer to daughters, both literally and metaphorically, as a kind of apprentice. So this could just be a reference to a lower grade male initiate, though it's less than clear. What then follows are a series of 7 prayers. The first immerses the initiate in the world of the 4 elements before propelling them into the heavens by the use of mystical incantations, various kinds of breathing techniques, and a special magical ointment. Rising through the celestial world, one becomes transformed into a star while encountering terrible thunder crashes, blinding light, and various kinds of divine entities which are silenced and bypassed by the use of further mystical words, various kinds of hand gestures, loud bellowing, and a series of hisses and pops. Passing higher and higher, the initiate beholds the unfolding solar disk with stars radiating out. The third prayer is said with the eyes closed and lists the exoteric and esoteric names of the solar disk. Upon opening the eyes, the initiate is given a first glimpse of the solar deity as a youth with glowing hair, a red cloak, and a fiery crown. Then one passes 7 further gods and another spiritual gate before passing through yet another inner gate before arriving at the celestial pole of the heavens. Here one encounters 3 sets of 7 deities: virginal snake-headed fates, black bulls with golden diadems, and the youths who turn the vault of heaven, casting down thunderbolts. Passing higher to the very vault of heaven, the initiate beholds the true form of Helios Mithras, immensely great, youthful, golden-haired, and crowned with apparently distinctive Persian trousers. Also, and critically important, he's holding the golden shoulder of a bull in his right hand, all the while lightning leaps from his eyes and stars radiate from his body. Here one bellows until out of breath and kisses special phylacteries, more on those in a moment. Then a final invocation is made and the solar Mithras utters a revelation in verse, causing your body and soul to weaken and for you to become out of yourself, as the text says. Despite the difficulty and the length of the revelation given to you, it's apparently imprinted indelibly upon your mind. One can pass apparently a long period of time and remember this revelation perfectly. Following the description of the revelation, the text then provides instructions for allowing a fellow initiate to join you on the mystical ascent, perhaps as a scribe for detailing the experience to. The prayers are actually whispered over the other initiate. Their face is also anointed with a kind of magical ointment, though it doesn't seem that the other initiate is allowed to hear the entire ritual. Finally, we're told that this immortalization ritual can only occur 3 times a year, and if a person disobeys the teaching, then the revelation is somehow withdrawn from them. In the section that follows, we're given instructions for creating the magical ointments and the phylacteries for the ritual itself. The first ointment is made on a new moon from a sun scarab, which is fed honey and lotus pulp, and then crushed with rose oil, consecrated with an incantation, and then 7 days later it is further mixed with myrrh and Mendesian wine. The ointment for the helper initiate involves the use of a mysterious plant called the contritis, which is mixed with myrrh and honey, then smeared on a leaf of the Persea tree along with various kinds of magical names, which is then licked off facing the sun 3 days later, though prior to the ritual. Of course, the natural question here is if this ointment has psychoactive or psychedelic properties, a very reasonable hypothesis. However, until the various plants can be positively identified, the jury remains basically out on this question. However, curiously enough, the text also contains a kind of addendum in which the writer tells us that the god instructed them to no longer use the ointment and to do the ritual once a month rather than 3 times a year mentioned earlier. What's really fascinating about this part of the text is that it appears to have been actually born out of an ecstatic experience in which the initiate was told by the divine Mithras to modify the previous ritual. Further, it's also apparent that the scribe that wrote this down has at least another manuscript of the ritual at their disposal, because they give variant readings of several of the magical words. It's rather clear, to me at least, that this ritual was carefully preserved, practiced, and modified based on that practice. What we have in the Mithras Liturgy is a profoundly careful and experimental mystical ritual. Despite the admonition to no longer use the ointment, the text provides a pretty detailed description of the contritis plant, although its exact identity remains mysterious. Though there is a specific mention of it growing in the quote, black earth, this is probably a reference to the Egyptian word for Egypt, during the specific month of Paoni or Paoni. This is roughly the Egyptian month of June and early July, so the herb may be indigenous to that region. Finally, the ritual phylacteries are also described as being made from the skin and the sinews of black and white sheep, written upon with magical words for the right and left arms. At this point, the text of the Mithras Liturgy becomes confusing. Well, I mean, the entire text is pretty confusing. What I mean here is textually confusing, in that it seems to start to quote lines from Homeric literature, which actually seem to go with a spell for constraining anger that actually occurs a bit further down the manuscript. Indeed, the whole text is oddly bracketed by spells which employ various kinds of Homeric verses for various kinds of magical effects, just kind of pasted in between them. To my knowledge, no other text in the Greek magical papyri is inserted within another spell in such an unusual manner. This only adds to the mystery of the text. The Mithras Liturgy is a fascinating window onto the mysticism of ascent to the divine, which we alternatively find in the Hermetic visions of Corpus Hermeticum 1, the pagan visions of the Divine One, the descent to the divine throne of the Jewish Merkava, and in the spiritual ascending purification described in the Chaldean oracles, and even in some mystical visions of Christians from this time. This form of mysticism seems ubiquitous in the ancient world, and we are so profoundly lucky for the Mithras Liturgy to have survived at all, providing us with a splendid glimpse into this beautiful literature and ancient spiritual practice. If you're interested in magic, Hermetic philosophy, or mysticism, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content on topics in esotericism. Also, if you want to support my work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content and topics on esotericism here on YouTube, I hope you'll consider supporting my work on Patreon or with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration of supporting my channel. The Mithras Liturgy itself can be found in the Greek Magical Papyri at PGM 4, 475 through 829, in the Betz edition, which is basically indispensable for anyone interested in the history of magic or religion in the ancient world. Again, you may want to check out my episode on the Greek Magical Papyri if you're interested in the magical practices of the ancient Greco-Egyptian world. Now, if you want a really deep dive into the Mithras Liturgy, there is a complete volume by Betz, which provides an extensive introduction, a structural analysis of the liturgy, the original Greek text, along with a facsimile of the actual papyrus, and a wonderful English translation and a positively extensive and probing commentary. This is an amazing text of scholarly erudition and well worth having for anyone interested in the literature of mystical ascent. The best introduction to the cult of Mithras is probably Manfred Klaus's The Roman Cult of Mithras. He provides the most exhaustive analysis of the surviving material, including the Mithras Liturgy, along with dispelling a lot of rumors that still fly around, arguing that the mythology around Christ is somehow aping the Mithras cult and its mythology. This is a bunch of weird 19th century rumors about how Christianity emerges from Mithraism, which just aren't true. At any rate, it's a really solid read for anyone interested in the ancient mystery cults or just ancient religion more generally. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and you've been watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.